the attempt here for Ukraine is that this counteroffensive is going to be very, very crucial. It is very unlikely that that we would see any kind of a negotiated process starting. We have to work together in this space because ultimately for Nepal, India will remain. India cementing a long-term relationship with Germany because I think defense partnerships are significant in that regard. Prime Minister visiting the US and Indian Prime Minister twice during his term, as well as addressing the US Congress twice, which is quite extraordinary.
Hello and welcome to the Ideas Factory. I'm Naghma. Joining me is Professor Pant. On this episode, some of the important issues that we will be looking at, of course, is the Russia-Ukraine war, which continues. Ukraine has launched a counteroffensive and has also claimed some initial gains. And very clearly, we see a divide now with indications or probably signaling of the Chinese giving more support, the North Koreans giving more support to the Russians, whereas the other camp is also now helping Ukraine more and more. So that divide, the fault line sharpens, and we will look at and analyze where is this war going. And India, of course, has received quite a few dignitaries during the last few weeks. We've seen the visit by the Nepalese Prime Minister. What does that mean for India-Nepal relationship? We've also had visits from the German and the US defense ministers. And of course, Prime Minister Modi is going on a state visit to the United States. So to begin with, let's look at Russia-Ukraine. Ukraine has claimed harsh that the heavy battle is on and there has been new gains in some of the areas and early phase of counteroffensive. We've also heard from Russian propagandists that probably millions of Chinese soldiers will be now needed in Russia or is an urgent need, whereas North Korea has also reiterated its strategic support to Russia. On the other hand, France is again proposing arming Ukraine a lot more. So this war continues and the divide is getting wider. How do we look at this?
Naghma, this has been the counteroffensive that perhaps a large part of the world was hearing about for a very long time. So finally it has arrived, and finally I think Ukrainians have been, over the last few months, been successful in mobilizing the support of their Western allies, both in terms of material as well as morale. We have seen how, despite some internal differences, the Western countries have rallied around Ukraine, and they have also pushed the boundaries in terms of the supplies of weapons. The kind of Patriot missile defense systems have come. Americans have talked about F-16s, which will perhaps not be used in the initial part of this counteroffensive, but I think the green signal has already been made. So clearly, I think as the summer is rising, the temperature is rising in Europe, and clearly the attempt here for Ukraine is that this counteroffensive is going to be very, very crucial, because if it does not succeed, then their claim to an eventual victory over Russia gets diluted, and therefore the support that they would be getting from the Western countries would be rethought in many Western capitals. Similarly, I think for Russia, this is very important, because if a Ukrainian counteroffensive succeeds in once again demonstrating to the world the ineffectiveness of Russian military capabilities and Russian leadership, then I think it could be a very disastrous a sign for Russia to come, because a success for Ukraine would mean a lot of support coming in from the Western countries, and also that their own, global standing, which has been quite considerably damaged over the last year, would further get eroded. So therefore, I think this perhaps is an inflection point in this war, and how the battlefield evolves will have a lot of bearing on not only this conflict, but also perhaps the global balance of power. As you were saying, there is a lot of noise about China, but China, if you look, official Chinese response has been quite moderate. They have not really said much about either the counteroffensive or the support for Russians. They, in fact, had presented a peace plan before a few months back, which did not go anywhere. And of course, there are question marks about the US-China negotiations that are about to start, and whether Chinese would look at their long-term engagement with the US as more important than supporting Russia. So I think both sides are in a bind, and unless there is credible demonstration of some movement on the ground, it is very unlikely that that we would see any kind of a negotiated process starting?
But the negotiating process probably looks very far away right now, Harsh, because it's also a war of narratives, and it is the different sides are claiming different things. So, what's really happening on the ground? For example, Ukraine has claimed that it has retaken 7 villages. The Russians. Have bombed the MiG 29 airbase. Ukraine is counter-attacking in multiple directions and has claimed early gains. But what is the truth in it? And also, what will it take for the Ukrainians to solidify that gain, or to actually conclusively say that they have an edge over the Russians in this war?
As far as the claims and counterclaims are concerned, Naghma, that has become part of this war, and I think part of most wars these days. Information warfare is something that is carried on along with the battlefield, movement of forces. So I think both sides will try to reconstruct and deconstruct the narratives that are emerging. But by and large, I think and it's very difficult to assess independently what is going on the ground.
Mhm.
But clearly, what we know that some initial gains have been made by the Ukrainians, and that perhaps they are perhaps correct in their assessment. But it's very difficult to look at them as a long term significant move of the forces in ways that perhaps will alter the course of this war. These are initial gains. These are gains that Ukrainians were expecting to make, and I think the crucial battle for them now is to be fought in the south, where I think the ambition is that if they can break the Russian forces into two groups, they can perhaps then prevent Russians and from continuing to supply their battle lines. So I think in that context, this push is very important and interesting to observe. For Russia, when everyone was talking about Ukrainian counteroffensive, Russians were also preparing. So they have, I think, in this case now they've fortified their defenses. So it's again a case of now Ukrainians breaking through the Russian defenses, which are quite solid, and it's not entirely clear that it would be that easy for Ukrainians to do that. But Ukraine has new weaponry. Ukraine has munition. Ukraine has, I think, most importantly, the morale. That I think is not present on the Russian side. Russians, we have seen how even the conflict between the Wagner group, the mercenary group that is fighting on behalf of the Russians, and the Kremlin has come out into the open. The town claims have been made on both sides. Russian Kremlin has said that they want to control Wagner Group now. So there is a lot of disjointness in the Russian approach, and that perhaps may cost them if the leadership and morale issues are concerned. But at the moment, I think it's too early to make an assessment. But clearly, I think both sides, especially the Ukrainians, would be hoping that if they are successful in their counteroffensive, then perhaps they can give a new turn to this conflict, which has been at a stalemate for quite some time, with either side, with no one actually knowing how this will pan out.
Absolutely. So, will this conflict take a turn now? And as you said, it is the inflection point, and something probably may emerge out of this new counteroffensive that Ukraine also claims early gains in this counteroffensive that it has launched. Now, coming back to India, India has had a very important couple of weeks, and we've received quite a few dignitaries. We've had visits by the Nepalese Prime Minister. We've also had a visit by the US Defense Secretary and the German Defense Minister. Prime Minister Modi is going to the US. Before that, it acquires a greater significance. But first, let's look at our neighbor Nepal, Harsh. And how do you think Prime Minister Prachanda's visit this time was different from his earlier visits? Also because he now appears to be a more reformed and a more mature leader, less of a communist that he was earlier. And this visit was talked about as a great success. Of course, India and Nepal have had a very strong and intimate social and cultural relationship, but politically, there was a lot of ebb and flow in this relationship, especially with the whole Kalapani issue and all of that. But right now, do you think what has been the impact of the Nepalese Prime Minister's visit, especially if we compare it with the Oli government? How has this been different now, Prachanda's visit?
I think there is a sense across, in both capitals, that this is too important a relationship to be frittered away on issues that would require long-term resolution. Whether you talk of the irritants and the boundary, whether you talk of the issues in terms of trade, all of these issues are not something that can be resolved or can find a long-term resolution in the immediate term. So I think what has been done during this visit is to cool the temperatures down, is to ensure that the two sides focus on convergences. And as you were mentioning, we have seen the Nepalese Prime Minister this time taking a very measured approach in his outreach to India, unlike last time, and perhaps he was more of an activist than a leader. This time he seemed more leaderly, he seemed more composed, and he seemed more in control. And I think that makes a lot of difference. He also was trying to balance, the last time, if you recall, his first visit was to China. Now, if you do that, then you create an atmosphere where ties with India necessarily start on a wrong footing. Now, this time he started with India, and I think that has given a signal that despite our differences, despite the China factor, despite some political opposition on both sides, we have to work together in this space, because ultimately for Nepal, India will remain the most important neighbor, and for India, Nepal will remain the first among equals when it comes to the to its neighborhood. So I think in that sense, we have seen this visit emerging as one where we have talked about issues that perhaps are more about building a trusted relationship than about those divergences and differences which continue to hamper that progress. So I think all in all, it has been a productive visit. But again, the proof of the pudding would be in the eating. So we will see how this pans out over the next few months. How the Prachanda government engages in India over the long term. Let's also remember that India will be passing through its own sets of political relative turbulence with the elections in 2024. So I think the stability in the relationship, perhaps that many are hoping, and the long term resolution of some long standing problems can only be expected after May 2024, when there'll be a new government in office with a new mandate. So I think we are entering a period where the kind of normalcy that Modi and Prachanda has ensured during this visit should lay the foundation, perhaps, of a relatively stable period in this very important bilateral relationship.
Of course, and that stability will be cemented, as you said, with the new government taking office in India in May 2024. And for now, India and Nepal's relationship is on a better and a more stable trajectory than it was a couple of years back. But we've also, how do you see the visit of the German defense minister? Of course, the US defense secretary was here 2 weeks before Prime Minister Modi's state visit to America, and it reinforced major defense partnership and talked of advanced cooperation in critical domains. The German defense minister has also been here, and a high point of that visit was, of course, the submarine deal, Harsh.
Yes, I think German visit was very interesting, because I think Germany today is at a very interesting stage in its strategic evolution. Germany is moving away from the post-Cold Second World War image of a country that was constrained because of its historical legacy. Today, Germany wants to emerge as a serious strategic player. Their ambition is, the Ukraine war has jolted the Russian establishment, as we have heard from the German Chancellor himself, saying this is a turning point for Germany. And I think that this attempt to infuse a new sense of life in German defense industry, German defense policy, Germany's forays into Indo-Pacific. I think all of these are signs that India has welcomed, because ultimately for India, Germany is a like-minded country, and a greater footprint by Germany in the Indo-Pacific is good news for India. A recalibration in Germany's China ties is good news for India, and therefore for Germany as well, I think they seem to have recognized that India also is keen to diversify its defense partners. And given the context in which we are talking, the Russia-Ukraine war, where we have seen already questions emerging about how effective or how credible Russia would be as a defense partner going forward, given that Russia itself is embroiled in a long-term war, in a long-term conflict. I think Germany's defense outreach is very significant, and the fact that we will have German and Indian firms bidding together for Indian submarine project, and they are the front runners in this case, is a very significant, I think, move from German defense industry perspective, but also in terms of India cementing a long-term relationship with Germany, because I think defense partnerships are significant in that regard, because they allow you to have a long-term relationship with your partner countries. The buyer-seller relationship is something that perhaps leads us into a long-term engagement. And I think Germany is also cognizant of the fact of that ultimately it's about co-production and co-development, and make in India, and then self-reliance in and India trying to build its defense industry. So I think that this particular moment is important, and I think Germany's evolution as a new actor on the global stage, as a new security actor, strategic actor on the global stage, is also something that India perhaps will be hoping to tap into much more than it had done in the past.
And of course, the US Defense Secretary was here. Lloyd Austin visited India, and this is just before Prime Minister Modi's state visit to America. A lot is expected from this state visit. It's regarded as historical. It's being described, of course, the India-US relationship is being described as the most consequential relationship of the 21st century. And we've seen that Prime Minister Modi is also going to address the Congress and the joint house of the Congress. And even though the US Congress is bitterly divided politically, the invite has been signed by both the leaders from both the sides. So we also hear that a very robust document is being prepared before Prime Minister Modi's visit. What all, I mean, of course, it's historical in many ways. He's receiving a grand welcome. But what really tangible things that we can expect in India-US relationship from this state visit?
I think this visit would perhaps outline the future agenda of Indo-US ties, because I think they are at a very interesting point. And what we have seen over the last few months, step by step, both sides have tried to put together pieces of this puzzle as to what is the next stage in this relationship. So in January, if you recall, India and the US signed the Initiative on Critical and Emerging Technologies, ICET, and then during Secretary of Defense's visit recently, India and the US signed a roadmap on defense cooperation. And I think the NSA, National Security Advisor, US NSA, is also here this week in India. So there is, I think, an attempt to put together, various aspects of this relationship in ways that perhaps, marginalize the contentious issues. And for a very long time, as we have been discussing defense cooperation, technology cooperation, the problem has been twofold. One, from the US side, the problem has been whether US is in a position to transfer technology, whether US government can persuade US corporations to shed their inhibitions about the intellectual property, etc., issues pertaining to India. And for India, there has always been this question that when it comes to critical technologies, Americans have not really pushed the envelope. So I think step by step, that problem is being resolved. In a sense, I think the defense and technology are going to be the two pillars of this relationship going forward. And the two sides have tried to lay the foundation of that, on that front over the last few months. And Prime Minister Modi's visit is likely to finalize a lot of those arrangements and to provide a long-term vision for this for these two pillars and how they will play out in this very important relationship. But I think, as you pointed out, this is also a very historical visit in some ways, because you would have a prime minister visiting the US, an Indian prime minister, twice during his term, as well as addressing the US Congress twice, which is quite extraordinary. And I think this perhaps we have also seen over the last year that despite Ukraine crisis, and which initially it looked as if it is going to impact India-US relationship, it has not. In fact, Indo-US relationship has continued to grow very significantly, and this relationship has moved beyond bilateral into almost global in scope, where India and the US are part of Quad in the Indo-Pacific. They are part of the I2U2 in the Middle East. So I think in some ways the relationship has matured to a level where even I think issues which used to concern at one point in time are being dealt with in a manner that have not impacted the relationship. So certainly, I think many would be looking at Prime Minister Modi's visit with great degree of anticipation. And if the US wants India, or India wants to have a relationship with the US to have a larger global impact, then I think this would be the moment to define the parameters of that relationship. Because clearly, India is in a different league today. India is also a different kind of an actor on the global stage. It is not going to be an alliance partner of the US. But short of being an alliance partner, how can we craft a relationship with the US that benefits us and that also allays some of the concerns that have been raised occasionally in the US, that how far will India go when it comes to US Indian interests? So I think this will be an interesting moment in that regard.
Absolutely, like you said, India-US relationship has moved beyond bilateral. In fact, Prime Minister Modi and President Biden have also met on a couple of occasions, and their personal equation has also been talked about. That is also probably going to impact the relationship, and a lot of expectations from this state visit of Prime Minister Modi, with a lot of focus on a robust outcome document. So all that is really interesting going forward. What can be expected from this visit? Thank you so much for joining us, Harsh. And that's all from us on this episode of the Ideas Factory.